Hi, Beryn Hammil. I'm very excited that we are having this conversation today. I'm Rachel Stern. I'm the director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized and Banned Art based in New York. And we are working for 2021 on a book project, an exhibition project of the artist, of the art Mäzen, a salonier, Emmy Rubensohn. And your grandfather, Benno Elkan, was a very good friend of Emmy Rubensohn. So Beryn Hammil, I would like you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Beryn Hammil. I live in California now. I'm from New York originally. And when I was in New York, that's when I knew Emmy Rubensohn. She was my Tante Emmy. She was the honorary auntie for my family. I grew up with my one brother and my cousins, Anthony and Matthew. So in your notes, the family tree needs to be somewhat adjusted. Let me give you some information about that. Benno and Hedwig had two children, Wolf and Ursula. Both came to the United States separately at different times, and both married in the United States. Ursula is older than than Wolf. Ursula's husband, Joel, my father, was born in the United States. Ursula's brother, Wolf, married Beverly. She was also born in the United States. So between Ursula and Joel, and Wolf and Beverly, there are 4 grandchildren for Benno and Hedwig. I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother. And then Beverly and Wolf have 2 sons, Anthony and Matthew. Anthony is older than Matthew. So that's the family tree on this side. I'm the only daughter. I'm the only grandchild of Benno and Hedwig who does not have children of my own. Such is life. I'm not in close touch with either of my cousins or my brother, and haven't been for several years. The important period of time in my relationship with my cousin Anthony, who lives here in the Bay Area, not too far from me, is that he was cleaning out his garage. And he had 6 or 7 boxes of papers and materials from our grandfather. When our grandparents died, his father, Wolf, and Beverly went to London to clean up and close the estate. And the papers that Wolf and Beverly brought back to the United States were things that Wolf thought were important enough to keep for posterity. When Anthony's father died, he inherited the boxes, and he had them in his garage for 30 years, just sitting in a garage on a shelf. And one day he called me and said that he needed the space in his garage. It's my turn to keep the boxes. What's in them? He said. I said. He says, I don't know. He never looked at them. So I said, well, bring them over. He thought it was going to be just a quick drop and leave. And after 4 hours, we had everything laid out on the dining table in categories: media, newspaper articles, photographs of Benno's work, notes from Benno, etc. And he left. And I said, what am I going to do with these things? Some of these are very, very important papers. Letters from Winston Churchill's wife, documentation about his work, his Order of the British Empire signed by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Here, right here. What am I going to, I'm getting goosebumps again. What am I going to do with this stuff? So I did some outreach and a long circuitous path, and I wound up at the Akademie der Kunst in Berlin by telephone and email. And I had a conversation with somebody there who said that their director, Wolfgang Trautwein, was going to be in the United States in a month or 2. He had a personal visit here. His wife's has a cousin who lives not far from me. Again, small world. So they agreed he would come and visit with me when he was nearby. And I made a luncheon, and I put the pieces out on the table that I have from my grandfather, and some books and, small little things that I had. And I made this lovely luncheon, and over there are sitting the boxes. And like a child at Christmas, he kept looking at the boxes, saying, when are we going to open the boxes? So after lunch, we cleared the table and we brought everything out. And he took his little notepad. And within 3 minutes of my presenting, and I was keeping the good stuff for last, just the beginning of the papers, he said, of course, we'll take him into the Académie de Kunst and we'll create his own archive there. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Germany, with Berlin, and eventually with Dortmund. Do you know that story?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know how the story came about, but I'm eager to hear that. But I saw that.
The short version of that is Dortmund, almost 5 years ago now, had decided that they were going to name a street in Benno's honor, Benno Elkan, LA, near the Arts College. Mm-hmm. That's right next to one of the museums there. Seemed fitting, a good place for it. So they contacted me and said, would you come as our guest of honor? Okay. So I did. And I had asked for and got a few moments to speak at the dinner after the ceremony. And I made a presentation. And what I presented to this group of 12, 15 people was a proposal. I proposed that they find a way to recreate Benno's memorial to victims of war, which we only had 9 photographs of, and the piece itself, which never got finished beyond clay, had disappeared. The clay turned to dust and it was gone. And I figured with today's technology, we would be able to do recreations. So I kind of dropped this pebble in the pond and let the ripples go out. And they came back to me a couple of months later and said, yes, we accept this challenge. And what they've worked on in the intervening years, and which finally went public and live in January of 2020, was the augmented reality of Benno's Victims of War Memorial.
And it's so plastic. I saw what's on the internet. It's so plastic and so absolutely feels so you can really experience the memorial. So it's exciting.
So that's been the work that I've been doing since I received those boxes. And I have not been doing a lot of PR or marketing or outreach about it. One of the things that Benno had in his notes about this memorial piece was that he wanted to see it in Dortmund, his birth city, and a place he, quote, loved more than anywhere else in the world, which is why I presented the challenge to Dortmund. And Dortmund fulfilled their responsibility to recreate it in Dortmund and make it have a place of honor there. Mm-hmm. So now the question is, where do we go from here with it? Do I want to do more of the PR marketing work? I don't have an answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where is his work? A lot of it is in London, right? He lived quite a few years in London after he fled Hitler.
Yeah.
And
he went to London in 1934. Mm-hmm. 33, he became one of the decadent artists. He received that decadent letter. So he went to London with Hedwig. Mm-hmm. By then, Ursula was still in Germany. She was married to Erwin Butz of the Comedy Harmonists. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
So she was in Germany, staying there with them until the Nazis said to them, the Jewish members of the group and family members, go away. So she and her husband divorced and she went to Paris.
Mm.
And she came out of Paris shortly before Paris was invaded and went to New York City, and then made her life in New York City until in the beginning. So.
Right. And Benno came to New York in the 50s, right? Only?
He came to visit twice.
Okay.
Once, apparently, and I have no recollection of this because I was a toddler, apparently he came with Hedwig when my brother was born. So that would have been 1948, 49, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then he and Hedwig came again in the 50s when Matthew was a toddler.
Mm-hmm.
So Matthew is, I think, we're 2 years apart. So me, my brother, Anthony, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an 8-year span there. So that would have put it mid 50s because Matthew might have been a couple of years old at that point. We have a photograph that's in the archives of Matthew with Benno when he's sculpting.
So that was one of my questions. Did he allow you into his studio?
I was not there. We have the photograph of Matthew there. That's all I know. Mm-hmm. I can recall visiting my grandparents. They stayed at a residential hotel on West 95th Street on West End Avenue. Mm-hmm. We lived, New York City. So we lived on the east side, 93rd near Park Avenue. Mm-hmm. So my mother would walk me to the 96th Street crosstown bus, put me on the bus alone, and said to the bus driver, her grandmother's going to pick her up on the other end. Mm-hmm. So then I would spend the afternoon with Hedwig and Benno at their hotel.
That is so interesting because Emmy Rubensohn didn't live far away from there.
I believe she lived in Washington Heights.
She lived, no, it was where Columbia is, 110th, 112, something like that, but on the Riverside Drive.
To me at that age, that was like another part of the world.
Right.
My neighborhood was fairly confined to public school on 82nd and Madison, friends' houses in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Columbia was forever far away.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, Columbia sounds, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe you had a question. I recall going to her apartment once. Mm-hmm. But it's a vague memory, and I can barely recall the apartment. I'd have to really rummage deep down inside to pull that up. Mm-hmm. But she came to our house. I'm going out of sequence to your questions, so stop me if you want to stay in order.
No, not at all.
Emmy used to come to our house for events like Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas, Passover. We weren't a particularly religious family. We didn't belong to a temple, but for the children, at some point they decided to have Passover dinner once every few years. But I can remember Emmy coming to our apartment for dinners. And we alternated with Beverly and Wolf. They had a bigger apartment and a bigger way to set up for big family dinners. So we were more often than not at their house. We had a smallish dining room. 6 was a crowd in our dining room. Mm-hmm. New York City apartments. But I remember, as I said in my notes to you, I remember her hands. She had such beautiful hands. And when I saw the photograph of her online and her hands are in repose, I said, yes, they're her beautiful hands. And she wore a ring that was a rectangular black onyx that had one diamond in the middle of it. The things we remember from our childhood. And her laugh. Her whole face would crinkle up, and she had a kind of high-pitched laugh that was more like a hee-hee laugh. And the whole room lit up when she laughed. It was a wonderful experience being around her.
so she did have an easy laugh, like she laughed a lot. And
I mean, put it this way, I was a child. So these are memories from my childhood. I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood for a variety of reasons, but Tante Emmy was one of my happy memories. So those I hold dear.
mhm. Yeah, she seemed, I mean, she was a big connector of people. So she definitely had an ability to find her way into people's hearts and to find their passions and to support their passions as well. So yeah. So do you know how Benno and Emmy met?
Do not know that story at all. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My Aunt Beverly, Matthew and Anthony's mother, would have known those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the two stories I mentioned that I knew about Emmy are from my Aunt Beverly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, hearsay would not be admissible in court, of course. But one of the stories is that when you were talking about how she connected with people, is that when she lived in New York City, and I may be incorrect, like I said, it's hearsay, she worked as a hostess at the restaurant at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Mm.
And guests would come in and she would take them to their tables. And then she would welcome a guest, and this was somebody she knew from Germany. So she'd start talking with them, she'd wind up at the table with them, and it became like this social event for her. And this was a constant situation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the restaurant where the fountain is.
Mm-hmm.
With I remember that restaurant quite well. I don't know if it's still there, but
unfortunately not. But
yeah.
I remember it well too. It was very good.
So that's one story. And another story, and again, I have no way of knowing the authenticity of it, but when I was in Shanghai, I made a point of going to the Jewish temple there. I was taken there. We had friends. He was the consul general from Germany to that part of China. And we had met this couple when they lived in San Francisco. He was the consul general from Germany to this part of the United States. And we became very close friends, and we visit with them regularly, correspond still. They're back in Germany now. So we visited them in Shanghai. And they took us to the temple that is still standing there. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful, wonderful building. And I met the people who manage the temple and so on. And I was able to tell them this story from my Tante Emmy. And that is that she and her husband were on one of the last trains out of Germany going east. And again, I don't know the details of this part at all. But they found their way with their one suitcase to stay at a place, and they were put up in a room upstairs. And the buildings in Shanghai are built around a central courtyard with terraces. Uh-huh. So they had their room, and they go to sleep the first night. And at midnight, it starts getting very rowdy and a lot of noise and a lot of music and a lot of talking and laughing and chattering. And Tante Emmy in her silk robe comes out on the balcony and says, "Shush, shush, shush, it's midnight, it's time to be asleep." Unbeknownst to them, they had been put up in a whorehouse.
Oh, gosh.
A house of ill repute, if you will. So this was, they were just opening for business at this hour. So this is these are the two stories I know of my Tante Emmy in her time.
Mm-hmm.
Then.
Yeah. And both characterize her in a very significant way. So it's really really beautiful. And she was an avid writer of letters. But hers were not kept, or we don't know really where they are. So we always have this one-way correspondence with many, many people that leave us to figure, what she said in response. But it's, yeah, she's definitely extremely interesting and must have been very stylish, right? Would you say, how would you describe her
Well,
personality?
remember, I knew her in her older age.
Mm-hmm.
So 1950s, how old would she have been then?
She died in 61, so 1884 she was born, so
Okay. So
elderly, yeah, in her 70s,
my
early
age.
early 70s.
Okay. So I knew her in her older years.
Mm-hmm.
So by then I knew her. She wasn't thin and svelte.
Mm-hmm.
She was portly, like a middle-aged woman,
Mm-hmm.
elderly woman. She was very short.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, I was also short. So 1950s, mid 50s, I was 10 years old.
Uh-huh.
So I was not my full height yet. So I was short, but I remember her next to my father and mother being short. My mother was 5'4".
Mm-hmm.
So, and as far as stylish, I can't speak to that specifically. I just remember her beautiful ring. That speaks to her style. I remember she had jade. There was something about her with jade. Maybe, again, these words are just starting to flit through my brain as these memories are bubbling up.
Uh-huh.
She might have had a jade pendant, something from her time in China. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I had been told by Beverly that she and her husband were extremely well-to-do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why they could be benefactors to the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very generous and extremely wealthy. That's all I know, that he was an industrialist, whatever that means in Germany at the time.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the years. She grew up in Leipzig, and so her father was well-to-do, and she married into a family that apparently was also well-to-do. So they had a large house in Kassel, where they lived for many years, and where she did her main entertaining, and had a lot of contacts. And they only moved to Berlin to get out of the country, so because all the agencies and the ways out were you had to go to Berlin first, and they were able to leave Germany through the transit um, uh, uh, train. So
Mhm.
they left on the train through Russia. So yes, but the house was apparently very beautiful, and she took in Ernst Krenek, for example, was in his beginnings, and they took him in and fed him, and supported him. So he wrote his first opera in their house, and she always had this guest book that she was. There was a little bit guest book, but it was also a little bit of a diary, so it changed a little bit over time. But that's where your grandfather appears, and so we see
You sent me the photograph of that page.
exactly.
Yep, thank you for that.
Exactly, and so they must have been very, very close to each other. It appears.
Yeah. It's interesting because Benno wrote a children's book called The Adventures of Tante Clementine,
Mm-hmm.
which the copy that I had, I gave to the Académie der Kunst, but I
Mm-hmm.
kept colored copies, Xeroxes of each of the pages.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a story about a Tante Clementine who goes traveling with her carpet bag, her
Mm-hmm.
rucksack. And I wonder how much of that might have been influenced by Tante Emmy.
Very possible.
Don't know.
Yeah.
But again, these little memories are bubbling up.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember how they related to each other? Like, did a conversation, were they silly with each other, or like how?
No, Joel was a more serious person, and oftentimes Ursula would talk to Emmy in German.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my regrets, especially now as an adult, working so closely with people in Germany and going back and forth often, I don't speak German.
Mm-hmm.
She never taught it to me.
Mm-hmm.
She taught me French, okay, but I never learned the German. So I know that Ursula was talking with her in German. I know Ursula would talk on the telephone with her in German, but I have no idea the conversations. And again, because they spoke in German, if Ursula was mindful not to do that at the dinner table with Joel so that he could be part of the conversation. But I don't recall the specifics of the conversations at all.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if Tante Emmy died in 61, I was in the mid 50s, I was 10, going up 11, 12, 13.
Yeah.
Not a lot, not a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Do you maybe remember a smell? Like, did she smell pleasant to you, or?
I always just, she embraced me and I buried myself in her bosom, you know? It was like that. So it was always where I loved being when she was there. You know, I can remember I would always want to sit next to her on the sofa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was sitting on the sofa. I would kind of make sure I was there.
Uh-huh.
Just kind of hold hands quietly, you know, secretly, discreetly. Hands. Yeah, because I didn't have a close relationship with my own grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
She was across the Atlantic Ocean. And my father's mother was very old and lived in Brooklyn. And we didn't go there very often, maybe once or twice a year. And it was a big ordeal. And so I didn't have any maternal grandmothering at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the closest thing one could say was Tante Emmy.
And she didn't have grandchildren. Now, I'm sure it was the same for her because she didn't have grandchildren, and she must have loved that relationship to you.
I thought about how much of this to talk about, and I'll just touch the tip of the iceberg. I came from a very challenged household as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a lot of intimacy with me. There was not a lot of connectedness with me. I was kind of like the outsider child. And so to have these touchstones with Tante Emmy, the occasions were important to me, but they were rare and far and few between.
Mm-hmm.
Just my reality as a child growing up. That's why I don't have a lot of memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you blocked them out.
I blocked them out, or they just weren't there to be created. I spent a lot of time by myself in my room reading, playing
Mm-hmm.
with my dolls. I can remember having conversations with my dolls where I would hold one up and I would hold the other up by their legs, and the dolls would go, and they were talking to each other. So I was a very quiet child. I was very withdrawn, and I spent a lot of time in my room by myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh. So was there music around when you met Emmy, because she was such a huge sponsor of music, and so many of her contact were music contacts? So
the only time that I can say that live concerts came into my life were through another woman, Peggy Levy, known as Big Bambi to the family. Mm-hmm. She was Ursula's sponsor when Ursula came to the United States. Mm-hmm. And on occasion, I would spend the night at Big Bambi's house. Mm-hmm. She had a Park Avenue apartment, small 2-bedroom apartment, and magnificent antiques, Americana, beautiful antiques. And she would take me to Hunter College to the Leonard Bernstein Little People's concerts, Peter and the Wolf, etc. Mm-hmm. So that was my indoctrination, my introduction to live music, to concerts. Mm-hmm. And Emmy was not a part of that. But by then, It was already after Emmy had died.
Okay. Mm.
I don't have any recollection whatsoever of going somewhere alone with Emmy, that she and I would go to. There was none of that. And again, maybe by the time I was old enough, she might have been too old to shepherd a 10-year-old girl around, 12-year-old girl. She might have been too old and frail at the time. Yeah. But I remember Wolf taking care of her when she was towards the end. Because he was a surgeon, he was a doctor, and he was chief of residence at Mount Sinai and what's the hospital up in Washington Heights?
Presbyterian.
That's it, yeah. So he had privileges at a lot of different hospitals. Okay. And I remember him taking care of Tante Emmy.
Yeah. So she had that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you and you didn't meet Emmy's husband, Ernst Rubensohn? No.
When did he die?
I don't. He died before. That's for sure. I think in the 50s at some point.
Yeah, I have no recollection of him whatsoever. I think, did Emmy die of a heart attack in the hospital? Now it's starting to come back that she had a heart attack. Wolf took care of her, put her in the hospital. Yeah, he put her in Medical Arts Center on 57th Street because his offices were in that building. And I believe she had another heart attack there and passed away. And again, this is old recollections. I may be mistaken.
No, but I think, I mean, I remember the heart attack, and she wrote also a letter that, you know, she wasn't feeling well in her correspondence, and that she was in the hospital and so on. So she shared that with Ernst Krenek. Yeah,
so I'm almost certain it would have been Medical Arts Center on 57th. You know, the building, it's still there. Yeah, opposite Carnegie Hall, which is fitting for Tante Emmy.
Yes.
Again, it's funny, I can't, somehow saying Emmy without the Tante, it doesn't fit.
No. those things stay, right?
Yeah.
So do you remember learning about her death? Like who?
The moment I was told? No, it wasn't like, set down children, we have some sad news for you. I don't have any moment of that recollection.
So.
Yeah. Again, I might not have even known about it at the time that it happened because my parents were so non-communicative with me about important things. And this was also right around the time that Ursula's own parents were dying. Within that same year. Her father died in 1960, January of 60, and her mother died in the autumn of 59. So like November 59, somewhere in there. They died very close to each other. So I remember the news of both of that, but not of Tante Emmy. I think it might have been more than Ursula wanted to share or deal with or any of that. Nothing is there. Nothing's in there.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been hard for you to, you know, hear about 3 deaths at, you know, and
look, because this past year has been way harder for me because 4 of the pillars of my life have passed away in the last 18 months. And of course, my relationships with these people are as an adult. I've made my own relationships with them. So to lose my grandparents, they were people who lived on the other side of the ocean.
Right.
And Ursula wasn't particularly close with them. And it was only after I received those papers and had an opportunity to read correspondences between Ursula and her parents that I discovered some truths about my family and myself, myths that other people had told me, which were complete fabrications. you know, this jigsaw puzzle was changing. I had to take out this piece and put in the truth instead.
Uh-huh.
So you grow up with some myths that you build your foundation on, and then those get taken away, and you go, what do I put in its place?
Right.
And then you find the truth, and the foundation is a little less wobbly.
That must have been super emotional. And
well, it was very relieving, because I'll share it with you, for why not? Everybody else knows it. I had been told by one of my father's cousins, right? Not blood relative to Ursula, the other side of the family. I had been told as an adult, 30 years ago or so, that Joel and Ursula married because Ursula was pregnant and she forced him into the marriage. Well, under the circumstances and the way they behaved towards me, that kind of made sense. So I just lived with that, I assimilated it, and I let it be. Fine. When I got the papers, there were the correspondences between Ursula and Benno and Hedwig that were talking about how she met this man, they were dating, they went out for dinner, they had a wonderful time, he proposed to her, they got married, and then they got pregnant. So there's the truth, right? When Joel and Ursula invited me to their 50th wedding anniversary in Los Angeles, 1993, I said to my then fiance, now husband, the math doesn't work. They can't be married 50 years because I'm born in 45. Right? So that's the myth that, and then when I saw the letters, the math did work. So again, these myths that get built on,
right.
Finding the people that know the truth, that are willing to tell you the truth. Why did this cousin tell me that lie? She knew perfectly well. She's gone now. I'm very close with her daughter. We haven't been able to figure that one out. But that was a myth that I lived with for about 20 years.
It's a long time. Yeah. And also children feel things. I mean, they right. feel whether something is right. not right about a story. So, and about,
But the interesting thing was that myth did feel right to me. It made sense of a lot of my childhood. Not realizing at the time that there were other issues, other things in there that could be attributed to the way it was, rather than the myth. So when the myth went away, I got to clear that layer out and look more deeply at what was causing that made me feel that way. And so I was able to unravel more of it. And in the big picture, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just move on, make the most of what you got and who you are. That's how I kind of live my life now. Because there's water under the bridge. I can't change it. I can't do anything about it. I know people, certainly in Europe and some here in the United States, who are still bemoaning World War II. They weren't even alive when it happened, but they're getting the stories and the myths and the experiences, and it's very challenging.
Right, right.
Ursula and Joel told me nothing about the Holocaust. They told me nothing about her first marriage. Nothing. And when I asked them point blank, were either of them ever married before? I might have been 10 or 12. One of my friend's parents might have been getting divorced or remarried. So, what do I know? And they said no. And then some years later, I discovered the divorce papers from Ursula. And I still didn't know anything about who he was until I'd been told to go see the movie The Harmonists. You know this movie?
No.
Interesting. It's been on YouTube. I don't know if it's still there, but you can find it online. It was on Netflix. Now it might just be on YouTube. It's called The Harmonists. Mm-hmm. And it's a German movie made in the 90s, maybe early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the story of the comedy harmonists. And there's an actress who portrays Ursula. So that's how I found out about who her family is. Her first husband. Now, small world story. I am cycling around. Remember I mentioned Wolfgang Trautwein, who came here to get the papers. His wife is the daughter of, oh, just flew out of my head. It'll come back to me in a moment. And if I can't retrieve it, I'll email it to you. Elizabeth is the daughter of a musician. Mm-hmm. And when we went to Berlin the first time, we had dinner with them in a restaurant. Or no, first they invited us to their house for cocktails, which is very unusual in Berlin, first meeting to be invited to somebody's house. So they invited us to cocktails, and we walk into their apartment, and I'm hearing the music of the comedy harmonists playing. And I thought, oh, isn't that lovely? Turns out that Elizabeth is this composer's daughter who used to compose music for the harmonists.
Oh my
gosh. I'll get her name. Yeah.
That is a crazy story.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the connectedness of the world.
Yes, yes. And that's actually how, yeah.
Hayman, Heymann, was the musician. Mm-hmm. And he was an Austrian who composed music, Werner Hayman. Mm-hmm. He was an Austrian who composed music and in Germany, and then the Nazis and so on. And he went to Hollywood. And he composed music there and composed the music for the movie Notorious.
Okay.
So again, thread that one backwards, and maybe there's a connection there.
That is so exciting. And that's actually how the work with Emmy Rubensohn happens, because yes, we actually Matthias Henke in Germany, he's a musical scholar who just this year published a book on Beethoven. So, but he has this passionate, for 20 years he's researching Emmy Rubensohn. And I think you saw the book that he published, like a small book that he published together with his students, prepared that. And in 2018, and now we're preparing a larger exhibition with more research that goes a little deeper, and we hope to bring it here also. It will open in Leipzig because Emmy's birth city has not been featured really at all. It hasn't been researched yet. But then every, the whole story kind of develops we met with about Benno Elkan, about your grandfather. So, it's, and then suddenly, there's a whole network developing and appearing that we know it is there, but it's so exciting, and it's detective work and
the woven tapestry.
Yes,
a new thread comes in and brings in a new color, and the it's filled out that way.
Yeah, and it's really exciting, and it brings her to life because this photo that you saw on the book, and you have the book, right? Do you have it, or you saw it online?
I saw it online.
Yeah, so it's German language, but I can send it to you anyways.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I have a whole section in my bookcase right here that's all my German books, and my husband is studying German, and so occasionally I'll put a book in front of him. He goes, "Yeah, I'll get to it later."
So this publication that we'll be working on will be bilingual, so that will be much easier. And we're also preparing an exhibition and hopefully include works by Benno Elkan also.
That would be wonderful.
But Matthias Henke is really he's the main scholar. I'm just the American arm who, I went to the cemetery and found, and photographed her gravestone and these things. So I do a little bit research because I love research, and I get excited by
I can hear that. Yeah.
By for example, meeting people like you. So it's really
Well,
rewarding.
this is how my world has expanded, and certainly being closed in now. I'm still in touch weekly with a dozen people in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Just they're now my friends, and it's a part of my life that I'm very comfortable with. I feel very comfortable in Germany. My mother would probably be twirling if she knew that I keep going back there and that I've been doing all of this, because when she left, she closed the door.
Uh-huh.
She gave me no family history.
Yeah.
And all of what I've been learning, I've been uncovering on my own.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very usual story.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And the pieces that I had from Benno, I've given most of them to one of the museums in Dortmund. I have a few small pieces left, and everything is in Germany.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And every once in a while, I come across, this could be interesting for you. I come across a piece of sculpture of Benno's that comes up on auction.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said many times that I'm not in the Benno buying business. So I will send the email with the auction alert over to somebody who lives in Bonn, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book on Benno's biography.
Okay.
So he is my quintessential expert on Benno.
Mm-hmm.
I will send you his information.
I would love to.
He might have correspondences.
Mm-hmm.
I know he has artwork. He has sculptures and medallions. He has a whole cabinet filled with medallions. I was at his home in Bonn a year and a half ago. And I will send you his contact information. He might know more about Benno and Emmy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. So he tells you whether those are real sculptures by him, or does
That's
he buy them?
one thing he does. He helps me authenticate, but also he's been known to buy a few of the pieces that I present to him.
Mm-hmm.
I just say, I just saw this come up.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make your own bids. I don't get in the middle of it at all, of course.
Right.
But yeah, so like I said, when I've been to his home in Bonn, he has his townhouse that is nothing but artwork from Benno, and he travels to the Southeast Asia, and he's a Southeast Asian collector as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he has magnificent pieces from them. Hang on one sec, let me see. Yeah. Yeah, this is the book, Hans Menzel Severing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
So I think it's still available.
Mm-hmm.
It's in German, but that is certainly a contact. I will put you in touch with him.
I'd love that. Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. And one more story that we do you know the Sonders?
Interesting about that. When I donated all the papers to the Académie der Kunst, the Jewish Bulletin wrote a story about me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story in the local newspaper and so on and so forth. And sometime later, I get an email from a woman who says that Marion Sonder, she says that she's in her 80s, she's putting her affairs in order, she's cleaning up her estate. She did research on Benno, and because of the article in the Bulletin and the Marin newspaper, she found me. And I'm a fairly public person at that point because I had a business and I was on the internet. Mm-hmm. So she found me. And we started a correspondence. I'm always very careful when somebody approaches me, you have to be. And we started a correspondence, and then it became phone conversations, where she said that she had been a close friend of Benno's and had a lot of correspondence with him and drawings from his developing the ideas for the menorah. Mm-hmm. And was I interested in them? And the underlying theme might have been, will you pay for them? Now remember, I'm not in the Benno buying business. So I said, well, can you send me scans of it? I don't know who you are. I don't know what this is. So she sent me some photographs of them and copies of a card, a little personal note card back and forth in English. And Marion Sonder apparently was a photographer. So she also took photographs of Benno. So I put her in touch with Trautwein at the Académie der Kunst. And on another, so then they had their correspondences. I stepped out of the middle. They had their correspondences. And then on another trip to the United States, Trautwein met with Sonder and took the papers and made that separate section of because I had told her about the Académie der Kunst archive. And wouldn't this be a nice addition to the archive? In other words, let's move it away from we're buying this to let's honor it, let's honor your family. She had to get permission from her brother and her grown children to make sure that it was okay with them to do that with these papers. And so that's how that section of the archive came to be.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you created a whole movement in Germany for your grandfather. That's beautiful.
Well, it's out of the archives developing that the people in Dortmund, they must have seen it in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. The people in Dortmund then went to the archives. They then discovered that Benno was one of the founders of the football team there, which in Germany is a big deal. That's like saying one of the founders of the New York Jets back in the 1890s, you know? So that became part of it. And that's when they started the whole thing with naming the street after Benno. And there were exhibits of Benno's work at one of the museums, but that was before they were in touch with me and I wasn't there. I have access to videos on YouTube of those and whatever. So again, building this tapestry and meeting people who introduce you to people who introduce you to people. And that's how it works.
Very beautiful. Very beautiful. Thank you so much. Another piece of the tapestry. Thank you so much. And I hope we can continue our conversation.
Absolutely. I welcome it anytime. And I will keep thinking of this and other people that might be helpful to you. Mm-hmm. The music side is less familiar to me than the painting, sculpture, Benno side. Mm-hmm. But, you know, between Hedwig and Carl, as you said, Hedwig might have been the connection to Emmy because of her music. You know, Hedwig was a concert pianist. You know that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it might have happened there that Emmy and Hedwig, because they were contemporaries of each other.
Right, right.
Don't know the stories there.
We certainly will not find them all out, but it's good to get a better understanding of the network and of also I'm really excited. You're the first person I'm talking to who knew her, Emmy. So she came a little bit more alive for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And just as an FYI, I don't think that either my cousins or my brother would be of any help to you.
Okay.
They have not been involved in my work at all. Mm-hmm. Like I said, we're not in touch with each other anymore. They don't have, they probably, and remember Matthew and Anthony were very, very young. Right. So they're younger than I am. And my brother he's on another planet altogether.
And you're the oldest of all of them. So,
that's right. That's right. And I was born in 1945.
So you have the most mature memories.
They are. I wish they were better, and perhaps now that it's being brought to my consciousness, they will float to the top, and if they do, I'll certainly send you things. Right. But I don't have any photographs. I don't recall even any photographs that Ursula would have had of Emmy. Mm-hmm. I have one photograph of Big Bambi, Peggy Levy, with me and Ursula, and that's it.
Yeah.
Not a lot of photographs left from that period.
Okay. We'll keep digging.
Thank you. I will. And you too. Keep me posted on what you
Yes,
discover.
yes, yes.
As the exhibit evolves, I'm looking forward to it.
Of course, of course. We'll keep you posted.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Beryn. All the best to you. Stay healthy. All the
Stay
best.
healthy, please.
Yes, you too. Bye.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
the best.